Pacers start the year off with some moves. They waived Tristen Newton. They're signing someone new, and they didn't sign someone that a lot of fans asked me about. I want to talk about all of that, some contract dances, and why tonight's game against the Heat is extra important for the Pacers. You'll get that all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Thursday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes, and today it's my first time recording in 2025, and there's a lot to get to. Surprising day for the Pacers. Moving on from a draft pick very quickly, Tristen Newton waived. RayJ Dennis, the plan is for him to come in. What's going on there? How did that decision come to pass? Does this mean anything for the Pacers' rest of their roster? Why didn't they do something I got asked a lot about? Plus, I want to talk to you about something that I think you should be on the lookout for, just because I think it's interesting. And then we'll talk about the game against the Miami Heat tonight, because boy, oh boy, is it more important than you think. Happy New Year. I said that already once, but now it's officially the new year. Locked On Pacers reached my listener goal for the year with about 36 hours to spare last year. So thank you all for that. The support is much appreciated. This year's going to be even better. And I must say, I never say this early in the show, but I'm going to do it. If you're watching on YouTube, you might be watching a lot and getting feeded the videos, but not subscribed. If you could subscribe, I would really appreciate it. Let's roll today. Pacers make a move, which was crazy to me. I was watching Wicked on my TV and watching the Mad Ants game on my computer. And the Mad Ants game went to overtime, and I'm loving their target score, and they lose to the Westchester Knicks. And the game ends at about 3:15. And then at about 4:40, I learn, move time. Tristen Newton waived. Tristen Newton played in that game with the Mad Ants. So an hour and a half after that game, it was over for him. And he played pretty well, Tristen Newton, in that game. 22 points, 4 rebounds, 8 assists, looked pretty good. Now, that's a disservice to tell you exactly about his recent form. The game right before that was not particularly good for Tristen Newton, and this is not necessarily right to second a discussion about how well he's playing or if that's exactly why he got waived. But he did get waived by the Pacers just a little over 6 months after the Pacers picked him 49th in the draft. Lots of, things you could say about this, right? I didn't think he was a bad player. I thought he was totally adequate in the G League. But I thought he was playing better than Isaiah Wong, for example, did last year, Pacers 55th pick in the draft 2 drafts ago, played in 5 NBA games, although they were on garbage time. I have nothing bad to say about Tristen Newton, the player or person. Nothing to say there. 2 games ago, to be clear, he was 0 for 7 with 0 points, 0 rebounds, but 10 assists, right? So they did win that one. They lost the one where he had much more stats. All this to say, for a draft pick, that's a pretty quick waiver. It's not unheard of that a team moves on from second-round pick in their first season, but the Pacers did it with Newton, and they will be filling his spot. We'll get to that in a minute. But I found this very fascinating, just that they would do such a thing. And the breadcrumbs were obvious about their ranking of how they felt about the two-way guys, right? They signed Newton and Jackson to two-ways right away, and then Freeman the delay as they, kind of figured out that maybe they want him on a standard. So clearly Freeman had the lead there, and then Jackson was playing really well early in the season and even started games, and Newton could barely touch the floor. And I know that they're trying to develop a guard and a two-way spot every year. They've always had a guard, right? Look back through the history of the Pacers, even when they were only given 2 two-way slots, always, whether it was, Edmund Sumner or Dwayne Washington or whoever for years and years, Devon Reed, you could keep going there. I was trying to develop a guard. I think that's fine as a strategy. And Tristen Newton was one of the guys this year. But, when the Pacers really needed their two-way guys, they leaned a lot on Quentin Jackson and never on Tristen Newton. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Quentin Jackson filled in pretty well. But that was one sign that he was the lowest in the pecking order. He played a lot more with the Mad Ants than the Pacers this season. I don't want to get too into the weeds on what Tristen Newton was doing because he's not with the Pacers anymore, but he was playing fine, right? He played 14 games with the Mad Ants this year, averaged 16.4 points, 5.7 boards, 6.6 assists, almost 40% from deep. I thought that was very telling that he was shooting better. You guys remember what I said after they drafted him? Even if it's a late second rounder, I'm all about the bet on a kind of do-it-all kind of guard. I liked the pick at the time, and I got why they did it. But now they're moving on very quick after the pick. Their teammates liked him. Kyle Mangus was talking about him after the Mad Ants first game, said he was pretty good. So they move on. And I think that the key thing reported today came from Scott Agnes over in Fieldhouse Files, who said, I can't find it now, reported that this move was Newton's preference, right? And if you're the Pacers and you find that out, because again, he played a game like an hour and a half before this happened. Like if that had anything to do with it, and the player they got in turn, who we'll talk about in a second, if you viewed them as essentially equals and one of them wants a two-way and one of them doesn't, I guess just do it. I mean, unless if they value Newton higher, of course, keep him, like get the guy in your building. But perhaps that is a factor here, because otherwise it does seem a little weird, doesn't it? That a player they drafted, albeit with the 49th pick in a crappy draft, is already out the door. And I didn't think Newton was playing bad enough to just be like, yeah, they should cut him. This is the obvious decision. So perhaps more under the hood here. I don't know of anything, obviously, yet they made a move. And it's for a player that just played for them and just got drafted by them, but did not have a great summer league, right? Clearly showed he had some development to do with NBA offenses and with NBA and specifically Pacers tempo, and had some good. I mean, I know I've talked about the last two games, but I think Newton's stats are good. But what's been interesting is he's pretty inconsistent. Like he had two really great games just before the G League showcase, but some of the games coming out were really rough for him finishing. Like he's either kind of a boom or bust kind of play finisher. His passing's always pretty good. He's a great rebounder for his size, but that boom or bust style is pretty tough. They didn't really have the setup ability on this team like they did on last year's Mad Ants team, not the fault of Newton, but they just had less guys. And so he was tasked with doing a lot with the ball, and now they're moving on. Guy they just drafted, and they are replacing him right away. I was curious what this would look like if they'd go internal or not. Not that no one on the Mad Ants is having a good season, and not that no one on the Mad Ants who's 2A eligible is having a good season, particularly Dakota Mathias is playing well, but no one on the Mad Ants is either having a good enough season and is 2A eligible and would play for the Pacers right away and would augur like an immediate necessary move. But you don't see teams on January 1st make a two-way contract move to get a 29-year-old wing onto an NBA roster. That's not to say there's anything wrong with Dakota Mathias. It's just not something you see happen very often, right? There was no obvious candidate to me on that team. And so I thought they might look outside the org, and I wondered what they would do. People were asking, is this for a center? What's the deal? It seems like if you're waiving a guard, you need a guard, especially for a team that likes to have two-way contract guards. And you could say Quentin Jackson's a two-way contract guard. That's true, but he also defends wings sometimes and has played lots of positions for the Pacers this year and has been with the Pacers very often. They did get a guard. They're bringing in RayJ Dennis. If you don't know anything about RayJ Dennis, that's fine, because he's in the NBA for the first time ever with this move. This was his first season, his first draft cycle. He had a two-way with the Wizards for 3 days before the season. He played one preseason game for the LA Clippers, and now he's coming to the Pacers. And he's got some interesting skills that I want to talk about. But I just find this all to be fascinating. There's no specific timing element to this and cap element to this. I think that's what I want to close with this Newton waiver, is that, two-way contracts can be signed up to March 5th in a season. It might be March 4th. So like that's last year when they converted Kendall Brown and signed Quentin Jackson was early March, right? Pacers had months if they wanted to do this, and two-way contracts don't count against the cap. You're paying the player, obviously, but there's no cap hit, so the Pacers don't go into the tax by doing this. There's none of that kind of stuff at play here. So no tax impact, no cap impact. That's good for the Pacers, who are dealing with lots of stuff in that way, but they didn't have to do this now, which also makes me wonder if there was some Newton preference element to this that made them say, yeah, let's just make a change and get someone else in the door. Perhaps we'll learn more in coming days when they actually do totally and officially sign RayJ Dennis, but that is the current reality. So who is RayJ Dennis? Who is this new guy in the building for the Pacers, plus some more contract geekery? And we have to talk about the Miami Heat game because it's very important. Before we get to any of that, though, I need to talk to you guys about the great people over at Gametime. I love going to live events, sports, music, theater, comedy. One of my favorite memories, attending concerts in the past. Last year, energy and excitement, unforgettable. And Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to only show you incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, looking for tickets to an upcoming event, watching the New York Liberty, using the Gametime app. Gametime Picks was awesome. Showed me amazing deals. I used the seat view feature that they have, and it was spot on. Super deal was really impressive. got a great seat, unbeatable price, and the app's own pricing showed me the total cost up front. No surprise fees at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. Back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Your second listen should be Locked On Clippers. RayJ Dennis's old team. Kawhi Leonard's about to return, it sounds like, for reporting. What's going on with that? Clippers playing better than anybody thought this year, especially given Kawhi's absence. You can hear more over on Locked On Clippers. Here in Pacers land, a new player, a new two-way player, probably not going to have much of an impact this season. Isaiah Wong played 2 games last year when the Pacers were healthy, but such is life. This is how it goes. RayJ Dennis, who is he? He's a rookie. He played in college for 5 years. 2 years at Boise State, 2 years at Toledo, and finishing up at Baylor last year. MAC Player of the Year 2 years ago when he was with Toledo. So now the Pacers have consecutive MAC Player of the Years with Enrique Freeman and RayJ Dennis. Dennis is a very interesting player. He worked out for the Pacers in the pre-draft process. I think it was their last workout of this pre-draft cycle. 6'2" guard, nosy on defense. He played preseason for the Clippers. Only played in 1 game, had a couple assists and a couple rebounds. Went to the Wizards, and then now, because he got waived by the Wizards off a 2-way, no one owned his NBA rights, right? He was a rights free agent, and among the best G League guards statistically of the guys with absolutely no rights owning, right? Last year with Baylor, 9th in the country in assists per game in college, right? And so he comes to, and he had even higher numbers with Toledo. So I wanted to check where he ranked in assists. He was 27th among guys who've played actual games. A lot of guys get like 1 or 2 game assignments. And of those 27 players, only 11 of them match RayJ Dennis' scoring numbers, right? So he's a decent scorer and passer, and he's a rookie. That's all great. That's all exactly what you want to look at. Tristan Newton was also those things, right? So it's not like this is some awesome steal or find in terms of what they gave up versus what they're getting, but they get a player who is good and one who, showed stuff in preseason for a real team already. Dante Jones, liked him. He was the Clippers summer league coach. He played well there, and Clippers could have maybe kept him, but they didn't. So again, no cap hit for RayJ Dennis. That's not how 2As work. So no tax concerns there, but he's now in the building. He was having a good year with the San Diego Clippers. I hate that when the NBA team and the G League team have the same name. He was averaging 16.7 points and 6.2 assists, 3.5 boards, started every single game for them. The San Diego Clippers lost 3 players to 2-way contracts. That's unbelievable. What's going on in that system? They're crushing it with the recruiting, but I think that what Dennis will bring is just a little bit more passing chops. I think he's a little bit better of a passer. I had him described by somebody who's watched him much more as he's not the best shooter, like 34.5%, but like Monte Morris-ish in terms of the way he plays, like a low mistakes kind of setup passer. He does make mistakes in other ways. Every rookie does, but that's kind of what he hopes to be, or what the archetype of if he's going to be an eventual NBA player every day, what that would look like, right? So I like that idea as a bet. I have no idea how good he is. If he's better than Tristan Newton, I have no idea why the Pacers really said, yep, right now we need to move on from Tristan Newton. This is their reality, and they have a new guy to watch with the Mad Ants who might be playing for the Pacers this season. It's very rare to see roster moves on January 1st involving 2A guys, such as life. So get used to hearing that name, RayJ Dennis. Mad Ants on a road trip. They come back early next week. Hopefully can connect with him when he comes back, talk about how he got here, if he knows Enrique Freeman from the MAC, all sorts of other stuff. But one rookie guard out, another one in. I'm sure the Pacers and fans will be totally rational about the 49th pick being gone in 3 months. But that said, this is a chance you get. It never feels good when you have to lose a draft pick that quickly, right? Pacers do deserve to wonder what happened, or if they could have done better with that pick. Let's talk about one more contracting that I've been thinking about recently. And this is a unique opportunity for the Pacers. And let me tell you, there is this is total speculation on my part, to be totally clear. But I think it's something clever that you all should think about, both because this is a thing that the Pacers could consider, and because I need to get something on your radar coming the Pacers' way. Rick Carlisle shared in his justification for resting Andrew Nembhard in Boston the first game that it was a back-to-back, a draining one at that, and the Pacers didn't have a back-to-back after that game until February. But they already had played a lot, and they've traveled a lot this year. They've had, if you haven't noticed with their schedule, they've had a lot of random trips where they go out for one game and come back, or they come home for one game and come back. And it's not so weird for teams in the Midwest because it's easier for them to do goofy travel things. There's so many teams around them. But Pacers have had a lot of them, and they've had a pretty condensed schedule. They've played, I think, top 5 most games in the league this year. And that's because, many of you know this, but for a refresher, they're going to Paris this month in a few weeks to play the Spurs twice in France as part of the NBA Global Games this year. Wemby in front of that crowd. It's going to be great. It's 2 games. So it's 1 home game for the Spurs and 1 home game for the Pacers. It's actually there, which is funny because both teams would say, yeah, it's a neutral site game. So it's okay that we both lose a home and road game, but it's definitely going to be a home game for the Spurs. That does not matter at all. Anyway, the reason that this is relevant to contracts and the Pacers and their schedule and what to expect is the Pacers don't play for several days coming in and out of that, right? They play Philadelphia and Indiana on January 18th. Then there's 5 days with no games. January 23rd, they play the first game against the Spurs. January 25th, they play the second game against the Spurs. Then they come back and don't play until the 29th when they play Detroit again in Indy, right? So that is between the 18th and 29th, 11 days, really 10 inclusively, where the Pacers play 2 games because they'll have to go there. I presume they'll go pretty early for time zone acclimation and events and all sorts of game promotional things, which they should do. That's good for the NBA and good for the Pacers in theory, right? So that's awesome. I unfortunately don't get to go. That's not really relevant to the story. But if you've been wondering about the Pacers schedule, that's why it's felt a little goofy this year. And after that, it settles in as a little bit more normal. They have back-to-backs again, and then they have homestands and road trips and all that. And that's great. The reason this matters, though, is they have really odd time off. And what got me thinking about this is, you know what the Pacers did the last time they had really goofy time off this season? That was the in-season tournament. They played that Sunday, pathetic loss against the Hornets, and they had this big gap before they played Philly in a late scheduled game, I believe on a Friday. They had 4 days off. And the very first day, they waived Moses Brown. And Moses Brown wasn't going to stick anyway. They traded for Thomas Bryant later that week. There was lots of other stuff going on with that. But part of the justification for not having Moses Brown on the team is you don't need to pay him for those days if he's gone and you're not playing. You don't need a backup center for games that aren't happening. So what does this mean for Paris? The Pacers aren't playing, but that trip to Paris is after contracts become guaranteed, right? On January 7th, if a player's not waived, their contract is guaranteed for the rest of the season if they're on a partial non-guaranteed deal. I've said a lot of setup. I've explained a lot of stuff. What am I saying? What does this mean? Let's talk about James Johnson for a second. His contract is currently not guaranteed. If he got waived today, he'd have a cap hit of like a million-ish. I haven't looked recently, but the Pacers would save some money, but they would lose James Johnson. And clearly they value him a lot, and fans can say they don't want that and have their own opinions. That's fine. I get he's not playing, blah, blah, blah. Clearly they value what he has. And what are they going to do differently with a roster spot that's better than a vet that they value? That's up to them to decide. In a vacuum, I would say they'd probably just keep him, right? But I wonder if there's a way for the Pacers to waive James Johnson, immediately sign him to a 10-day. Then as soon as that expires, let's pretend they waive him on the 7th. They sign him to a 10-day. The day he clears waivers on the 9th. That expires on the 18th. Then they fly to Paris. They don't need to sign him to another 10-day until they play in Paris, right? They could even not sign him while they're in Paris and then sign him when they come back. And then they save all those days of not having James Johnson's cap hit. They re-sign him for a 10-day when he comes back. That gets him to the trade deadline. Something where they juggle 10 days because they have, 11 days where they only play twice. That could allow them to save a pretty good chunk of money away from the tax. Not a lot, but enough that it's like, that might be worth exploring. And they've had a game 2 seasons in a row where they've waived James Johnson on a guaranteed deal, and he's sat in the crowd because he's not technically on the team, and then they've re-signed him 2 days later. Like, they've done goofy stuff with him before. They always bring him back. It's always worked out. I wonder if there's a way for them to use their time off around Paris to save some money to allow them to have just a smidge more flexibility for any sort of things, like signing someone else not currently on the team to a 10-day later in the season if they somehow clear a roster spot at the trade deadline, or convert a 2-way guy to a standard deal if they, again, clear a roster spot between now and the trade deadline, or just waive someone altogether. This is a lot of gobbledygook to say. I think if they had a normal schedule season without some goofy 2 days and 11-game stretch where they're going to a different continent in the middle of the season, yeah, they'd probably just keep James Johnson. Their luxury tax concerns make it not an easy decision, but I would assume that's what they would do. But because of this, I do wonder if there's some deeper thinking to it. than that. And I really over-explain that, but there's a lot of evidence that says, hey, this does make sense. There's ways for them to juggle this that give them some sort of flexibility that no other team besides the Spurs can theoretically use this season. So keep that in mind. That's in the next 5 days. I already talked about James Johnson's contract stuff a couple times in the last couple of weeks. I can point to episodes if you want to hear more about that. To just probably the last decision the Pacers will have to make before the trade deadline in terms of sorting out their roster, especially after making this move today. But such is life, and such is the end of me over-explaining James Johnson's contract guarantee for the 3rd season in a row. But he's been on the team for 3 seasons in a row because they very much value what he brings. Again, I'm not here to debate that right now. I'm here to talk about contract stuff. Let's talk about the game. The Pacers are going to play tonight in Miami against the Heat. Heat played the Pelicans the night before. And why it is extra important. I think some of you have probably already caught on to this, but it is time to talk about it. But before we get to any of that, though, we had talked about the great people over at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, like a week and a half away. It's not too late to get in on the regular season action, though, with FanDuel. They are America's #1 sportsbook because right now, new customers on FanDuel can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets. How about that? If your first $5 bet wins, FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. You can bet on which players are going to score a touchdown or how many points each team will score. It's thrilling. Or who's going to score the first touchdown or the over-under. The classic money line spreads, everything. I probably just repeated myself. So much more action on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Back here on Locked On Pacers, thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Make your second listen Locked On Heat. Hear about Jimmy Butler, crazy saga nonsense. He took the most absurd 3 in Heat Pelicans tonight that I've ever seen. They did win the game still. Wes Goldberg, David Miller, where they play the Indiana Pacers. Let's talk about this game and why it's important. It is meeting number 3 of the season between the Heat and Pacers in a 1-1 series. And it is never too early to think about tiebreakers. I have said on this podcast, on the record, talking about NBA ratings, that I think the season might be a little too long. That said, every game is still very important, especially against teams in your conference, especially against teams in your conference around you in the standings. Just ask last year's Pacers, right? 3 teams in the NBA, or in the East, won 47 games last year. The Orlando Magic, the Philadelphia 76ers, and the Pacers. The Magic won their division and got the 5th seed. The Pacers had the head-to-head over the Sixers and got the 6th seed, and the Sixers got the 7th seed. Look how that shook out for them in terms of who they were playing in the first round and what it augured for a playoff run. Those tiebreakers, those games against Philly, they played twice back-to-back very early in the season, mattered a lot for the Pacers, and they beat them without Haliburton in January. Like, those are huge wins. It feels like one game at the time, and you look back and you're like, wow, that game really mattered. And really, it was all 47 wins that got them there. But the tiebreaker setup specifically was because of teams around them. Pacers play the Heat 2 more times this season. They do not want to be on the back foot in that one. That is close right now. The Heat currently have 16 wins also, just like the Pacers. They played 4 fewer games. See what I just said about Paris, right? But they have the same number of wins right now. This is a very big game for the Pacers beyond just that they're playing a team that they can beat and already have beaten once this year. Those are very important for tiebreakers. Let's talk about tiebreakers. I shouldn't have done the teams at the very top and very bottom of the East. They're so far away. I did the top 2 because they haven't played the top team yet, and the second one's just fun to say. Let's run through every tiebreaker in the East, just so you can really understand this, which is crazy for the Pacers that they do so well against these teams and stink against the crap teams. The Cavs, 0-0. Pacers haven't played them yet. That's going to be goofy. 4 times in the last 50 games. It's going to feel like the Pacers are playing the Cavs all the time coming up here in a second. And same with another team. Nothing really going there. Very unlikely that tiebreaker matters. Pacers already got the tiebreaker over the Celtics at 2-1. Also very unlikely that tiebreaker matters. The third one in the East is Knicks-Pacers. That's 1-1 with 1 game to go. Knicks are on fire. I think they've won 9 in a row. I would wager it's very unlikely that tiebreaker matters, but the Pacers could still get it. The Magic, they are the only team right now in this top 4 that are beating the Pacers. That's 1-2 in that series, but there is a game to go. Pacers can tie that one up, but the Magic are probably going to win their division again. That one's going to be tough for the Pacers to get. That's why those games against the Magic, especially the one where the Pacers, only scored 90-something points without Banchero, really hurt, right? Really, really hurt. But that's going to be a tough team to catch anyway, although they're so injured that maybe, just maybe, they'll sputter at some point. Then you get to the teams that are much closer to the Pacers in the standings right now. And the most painful one is the team they just lost to. That's the Bucks. That's 0-2 right now with 2 games to go. Very unlikely the Bucks or Pacers win the Central Division with how good the Cavs are. So conference record or record against common opponents, lots of stuff could come into play. But for the Pacers to have the tiebreaker over the Bucks, they've got to win the last 2. Currently 2-0 Milwaukee. Next is to the Heat. It's 1-1 right now with 2 games to go. But again, you don't want to be on the back foot for this. You don't want to be clinging or praying for a late season win to get a tiebreaker, to get a key win in the standings, which is exactly what happened in Pacers Heat last year. They played this crazy important game, and I believe the Pacers' third to last game that went a huge way in dictating who the Pacers got the 6th seed and the Heat basically got the 8th seed, largely on the back of that game, right? Set yourself up for success now. The Hawks, better record than the Pacers right now. That's 0-0 with 3 games to go. I think that will be one to watch, especially if you think about where the Pacers want to be with the 6th seed or the play-in. How they play against the Hawks is going to be a key one to keep up on. Pacers-Pistons is 1-1 with 2 games to go. Pacers-Bulls is 1-0 Pacers with 3 games to go. I don't know how much the Bulls one will matter. I have a feeling that team's going to try to not win as many games later in the season. Detroit could matter, though. That team's certainly riding high, but Jaden Ivey got hurt tonight. We'll see where they end up in the season. The 76ers is 1-1 with 2 more to go, so that one's TBD. Nets is 1-0 Nets with 3 to go. That team is much worse than the team that beat the Pacers. So the Pacers can win every single tiebreaker still in the East. It's possible. Orlando's probably the most unlikely. Somehow the Magic would have to not win their division, but the Heat one is they're the second best team in the Magic's division, right? The Pacers need to, actually the Hawks are right there. Either way, the Pacers, really important game for them. The tiebreaker thing mattered a lot for them last year. Every game matters, but this one extra matters, especially given how well they've done in the last season. I'm not going to tell you that. I can just do them. It's 0-2 against the Raptors and Hornets and 1-0 against the Wizards. Those teams stink, and it's not likely to matter, just like with the top 3 teams. The Heat tonight in Miami, they're on a back-to-back, like I just said. Look, the Pacers, it's 1-1. They beat the Heat. They also had their most pathetic performance of the season against the Heat. Not their worst loss, but just the most like, what on earth just happened game where the effort was just not there. Inexcusably bad. They can't have that tonight, right? The Heat are good, and the Heat are going to play disciplined basketball. I think they're pretty underrated this year. Their record doesn't really reflect what they've done. There's a reason they're 2 games over 500. They're almost top 10 in both offense and defense without really being that efficient on offense. They're not good inside the arc. They're a good shooting team, but they get to the line a lot, and they almost never turn it over. And that's a good recipe for success. That means you're giving yourself lots of chances. And when you have good shooters and you give yourself lots of chances, and all of a sudden Tyler Herro is a great point guard, you have a really good team. You have a system that really works, right? So for the Pacers, not fouling is going to be important in this game, and shutting off the water of just one really good Heat player I think is going to be important, whether that's Jimmy or Bam or Herro. We'll see if Jimmy plays on a back-to-back since he did just return. But I'll be curious how that shakes out. I think that would be the defensive key, though. Keep down the fouls. That is the Heat's bread and butter on offense. Getting to the foul line, hitting those free throws. They take the 10th most in the league. And for a team that's low volume in terms of shots per game, that's pretty valuable. And defensively, the Heat force a lot of turnovers and never foul, right? So the opposite of how they like to play on offense. In general, the foul battle is going to be important. And in general, the possession battle, like it has been and just was for the Pacers against the Bucks, is going to be important. I would say if the Pacers have a decent shooting night, they'll have a pretty good chance to win. But they can't not try. They can't foul the crap out of the Heat. And if they let the Miami team get going from deep, we saw it the first time these two teams met. They can just run away with games. So there's a lot the Pacers have to be attentive to. Eric Spoelstra teams are really good. The Heat are pretty good this season. But I think the key to the game for the Pacers will be keeping their fouls down and trying to, if this was just snap your fingers and do it, every team would do it, but trying to slow one of the Heat's big 3 on the offensive end. That'll give them a chance. They've had some epic games in Miami the last couple of years. The Bruce Brown game, Tyrese Haliburton's signature shot until the last year's playoffs was in Miami. He also had 44 down there. Looking forward to this one and how it goes. We'll break it all down right here tomorrow on Locked On Pacers, talking Pacers Heat, whatever happens in that one. You can find me on Twitter if you have questions about any of the Cap Dorkery or RayJ Dennis or Tristen Newton or anything, at Tony Aries. This podcast is on Twitter as well, at Locked On Pacers. I'm also on Blue Sky at Tony Aries. It's where you can read about the transactions the Pacers made yesterday. Both Twitter and Blue Sky tweeted the links to those stories in Forbes. Thank you guys for listening and watching today. Here's to a great 2025. Pacers have a chance for me to say they haven't lost in a year if they win tonight. You know it's coming. Thanks for listening. See you tomorrow. Everybody have a wonderful day.